The night broke open with a fury that seemed almost alive, as though the heavens themselves were tearing apart. Rain lashed against the earth, turning dirt to rivers of mud and shadows to shapes that moved restlessly in the storm. Lightning clawed across the black sky, and thunder rolled like the growl of some ancient beast. In the heart of that chaos, Cassidy Flynn bent low against the rain, his hat pulled tight, the water dripping from the brim into his weary eyes. He had gone out only to mend the cattle fence, a duty he never shirked. But fate had prepared something far stranger for him than a broken post in the mud. It was then, in the roar of thunder and the whip of cold wind, that he heard it. Screams. Not the distant cry of a coyote or the wind tricking his ears, but human voices, sharp, pained, desperate. He froze. The storm was wild enough to kill a man if he strayed too far from shelter, yet something in those cries dragged him forward. He moved through sheets of rain until the canyon walls loomed before him, jagged and merciless, and there, beneath a collapsed ridge, he saw them. Two figures, pinned beneath the weight of fallen rock, their bodies fighting against the trap of stone and mud. Blood ran with the rain, dark streaks glistening in every flash of lightning. Cassidy's breath caught. These weren't ordinary women. They were tall, almost statuesque, their bodies sculpted by strength and years of training. Their dark hair clung to their faces, their sharp eyes gleaming with both pain and defiance. Warriors, he could see it instantly. Everything about them, from the muscles in their arms to the way their gazes measured him even through agony, screamed of a life forged in combat. One sister was unconscious, her head wound seeping into the storm water. The other glared at him with eyes like obsidian fire, not pleading, not begging, judging. "You leave," she managed, her voice cutting through thunder. "Dangerous for you." But Cassidy had already thrown himself to the ground beside them. He dug his hands into the mud, leveraging a broken branch as though it were his lifeline, muscles straining, back burning, breath tearing through his lungs. Every stone lifted was a victory against the storm, every grunt a promise that he would not leave them here to die. Their legs were trapped, their bodies too heavy to move without risking worse injury. Still, he fought the earth itself, mud coating his arms, the storm biting into him like punishment. Time blurred. The storm had no mercy, but something inside Cassidy surged, stronger than the rain. When he lifted the final stone and dragged the unconscious sister free, his body almost gave out. He collapsed in the mud for a heartbeat, chest heaving, vision flashing. Yet the conscious one, later he would know her name, Nia, stared at him as if she had never seen such a thing before. Not kindness, not mercy, but a man who would choose to bear a stranger's suffering as though it were his own. The wind howled through the canyon, but Cassidy had a choice to make. Town was miles away, and the storm showed no signs of relenting. His cabin, humble though it was, stood 2 miles in the opposite direction. Taking them there meant more than danger from the storm. It meant questions. Why would a rancher risk his life for 2 Apache women? Why would he carry them instead of leaving them for their own people to find? And yet, as his eyes lingered on the unconscious sister, Kira, with her dark hair plastered to her pale, wounded face, he knew the answer had already been decided. He could not abandon them. Not now, not ever. He slung Kira across his shoulders, her weight threatening to drop him to his knees in the sucking mud. Every step was a battle, every breath a prayer. Nia limped beside him, refusing his hand despite her own injury, her jaw clenched with a pride he couldn't help but respect. They trudged through the storm like fugitives, the earth beneath them trembling with each crack of thunder. When Cassidy stumbled, Nia's hand steadied him briefly, their eyes meeting in that moment, something passing between them that words could not hold. By the time the cabin came into sight, Cassidy's body screamed for rest. His muscles were raw fire, his lungs scraped hollow. But the moment he crossed the threshold and lowered Kira onto his bed, warmth surged into the small room like a blessing. The kerosene lamp flickered shadows across the wooden walls, painting the women's faces in soft, trembling light. Cassidy tore strips from his only good shirt to bind wounds, his calloused hands moving with care. He treated them as he would any human being in pain, with patience, with gentleness, with a quiet dignity that surprised even himself. Nia watched him with eyes that cut deeper than blades. She was used to men who took, who demanded, who used power as weapon and shield. Yet here was a rancher, a poor man with nothing to gain, choosing to protect instead of exploit. When his hand brushed her skin as he wrapped her wound, her body tensed, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous, something that whispered of desire, of recognition, of an awakening she hadn't expected. Kira stirred, her dark eyes opening, locking instantly on Cassidy. Even from the floor, wrapped in his spare blanket, she held the room with commanding presence. Her voice, deeper than her sister's, carried like music when she finally spoke. "You could have left us to die." "I don't leave people to suffer," Cassidy answered, simple as rain, steady as stone. The sisters exchanged a look then, one that seemed to ignite the air around them. Silent words passed between them, words Cassidy couldn't hear but felt in his bones. Something shifted in that cabin, something neither storm nor time could undo, and so it began. What had started as an act of kindness would turn into a story that would rewrite destinies. A story of a rancher and two warrior daughters, of danger and desire, of salvation and surrender intertwined. And though Cassidy did not know it yet, that night's storm was only the beginning of another kind of tempest, one of hearts, one of choices, one of love so fierce it would defy the boundaries of tradition itself. So, dear listener, let yourself breathe with this story. Let it flow into your chest like a balm, warming you the way fire warms tired bones after a storm. And if this tale stirs your heart, if it brings you even a whisper of healing or a flicker of romance that eases the loneliness of your night, let us walk this journey together. Leave a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe so that more stories of love, courage, and destiny may reach you when you most need them. For love, after all, grows stronger when shared, and perhaps tonight this story has already begun to heal something tender within you. The storm passed, but its memory clung to the cabin like smoke, seeping into every shadow and breath. Morning light slipped through the lone window, painting the wooden walls in soft gold. Cassidy had not slept. He had dozed in fragments, his dreams filled with dark eyes and whispers he could not translate. Dreams where two tall figures moved like predators, yet looked at him as though he were prey worth claiming. When he rose, his body ached from the weight of carrying Kira through mud and stone, yet the ache felt alive, as though it had branded him with something unforgettable. Nia was already awake, sitting near the fire with her long legs stretched before her, her injured one bound tight by his makeshift bandage. Her back was straight, her head high, her presence commanding even in silence. She seemed carved from stone, and yet when the light touched her face, there was softness too, a fleeting vulnerability that made Cassidy's chest tighten. She did not speak at first, only watched him with that measuring gaze, the gaze of someone trained to see weakness and strength in equal measure. Kira stirred soon after, her wound cleaned, her dark hair braided back by her sister's careful hands. Even half-conscious, she radiated power. When her eyes opened fully, they locked on Cassidy, and he felt his breath falter. She studied him as though he were a puzzle carved by fate itself, a man she could not decide whether to trust or test. Her lips parted, and though her voice carried the weight of exhaustion, it still sounded like music woven with steel. "You see us," she murmured, the words simple but layered with meaning. "Of course I see you," Cassidy answered, almost startled. Kira tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. "Not everyone does." Her tone held centuries of pain in its undercurrent, pain of being judged for bloodline, for tribe, for being women who lived as warriors in a world where women were expected to bow. Cassidy felt that weight, though he could not name it, and something inside him shifted, an understanding dawning that these sisters were not merely people he had saved. They were storms themselves, bound by fire and blood, and somehow the storm outside had brought them into his life so he could stand at their center. The hours unfolded in uneasy quiet. Cassidy stoked the fire, prepared a modest breakfast from what little supplies he had, and tried to focus on practical tasks. Yet every movement seemed amplified under their gazes. Nia's eyes followed his hands when he cut bread, when he poured water, when he reached for the kettle. Kira's presence filled the room even when she said nothing, her silence pressing against him like a tide. When he dared glance at them, he caught looks exchanged, whispers in their language, the flicker of a smile, the tightening of a jaw. It was as if they were weaving some decision between them, one thread at a time, while he stood outside the loom. And yet, even as unease rippled through him, there was a strange warmth in the air, healing almost, as though his small act of care had opened a door they had never known existed. They were women used to fighting, to being seen as weapons before being seen as daughters or sisters. But Cassidy's touch had been gentle, his words without demand. That gentleness worked like medicine. It wasn't only their wounds that were being bound, it was something deeper, something unspoken. Nia broke the silence at last, her English halting but clear. "Why do you help us? You risk your life. For what?" Cassidy met her gaze, steady as he could, though the question cut him to his core. "Because it's right," he said, his voice low but certain. The fire cracked, the room holding its breath around them. For a moment the storm outside seemed to echo within, though the rain had already ceased. Nia looked away, her jaw tight, but Cassidy caught the flicker in her expression, the way her walls shifted, if only slightly. And Kira, hearing his answer, leaned back against the wooden frame of the cabin, her lips curving in a shadow of a smile that was equal parts dangerous and alluring. The day stretched on, heavy with tension. Cassidy fixed tools, cleaned mud from his boots, tried to distract himself with anything that would keep his mind from lingering on the sisters' eyes. Yet the cabin felt smaller with every heartbeat, filled not just with their presence, but with something unspoken that thickened the air. He could feel them watching when he bent to stoke the fire, when he passed them food, when he sat against the wall pretending to rest. Their scrutiny was not hostile, not even entirely cautious. It was something deeper, something that made his pulse race and his thoughts blur. At dusk, when the shadows grew long and the fire burned low, Cassidy found himself listening again to their voices. They spoke to each other in Apache, quick, sharp exchanges that rose and fell like a private storm. He did not understand the words, but the rhythm of them, the way their eyes lingered on him in between, told him enough. They were deciding something. He was at the heart of it, though he could not guess what it was. The night deepened, and sleep pulled at his weary body, but unease kept him restless. He lay on his narrow bed, the firelight casting golden lines across the ceiling, and tried not to think of the sisters lying together on the floor before the fire. But thoughts came unbidden, the sound of their voices, the image of their silhouettes moving in unison, the memory of Nia's eyes when his fingers brushed her skin. He turned on his side, willing himself to sleep, but his heart betrayed him, beating faster with every remembered glance. Then came the sound. Soft footsteps against the wood. His breath caught. He did not move. The steps paused near his door, lingered, then retreated. A whisper followed, words in a language he could not understand, but whose tone wrapped around him like smoke, like a secret too intimate to be spoken aloud. Cassidy closed his eyes, but the sound lingered, tugging at him, awakening something in his chest that he could neither name nor fight. By morning, the world had changed again. Dawn crept through the cabin's single window, turning the storm's wreckage into glittering dew across the land. Cassidy woke with the strange certainty that his life had shifted forever, even though the day had only begun. When he sat up, the sisters were already awake, standing at the foot of his bed as though they had been waiting. Their eyes held a weight he could not decipher, a determination that made his pulse stumble. "The storm is over," Cassidy said, his voice rough, unnecessary. "Yes," Nia replied, her gaze piercing through him. "But something else has begun." Her words settled in the air like prophecy. Kira stepped forward, her tall frame casting a shadow across his small room. Her voice dropped low, intimate, almost tender. "You showed us kindness when you had every reason to fear us." "And you saved our lives," Nia added, her tone steady but softening with each syllable. Cassidy sat up, his heart hammering, his throat dry. The sisters moved closer, not threatening, but closing in with a presence that made the world tilt. Their eyes, dark and intense, held him in a grip stronger than chains. And in that moment, Cassidy Flynn realized that whatever storm had passed outside his cabin, another, far more dangerous, far more irresistible, had just begun within its walls. The rain had left the world hushed, the canyon wrapped in mist and silence, as if nature itself held its breath. Inside the small cabin, the fire whispered low, casting shifting shadows that turned every movement into something charged with meaning. Cassidy moved carefully, aware of the weight of two gazes following him, the warrior sisters who had survived the storm now filling the room with a presence larger than its four walls could contain. He had brought them here to heal, but the truth pressed at his chest. He was the one being transformed. Kira sat with her back against the log wall, her dark eyes fixed on him. Even weakened by injury, she looked unshakable, her presence commanding without effort. The cut on her forehead had been cleaned, the bleeding slowed, yet it did nothing to diminish the fierce beauty that radiated from her. Her sister, Nia, knelt near the fire, her long hands steady as she turned a strip of cloth in the light, checking the wound on her leg. Every movement of hers carried discipline and restraint, but beneath it Cassidy sensed something restless, like a wolf pacing in its cage. They had refused his bed again, choosing instead to rest near the fire. When he offered food, they accepted with quiet dignity, eating sparingly, never wasting, as though every bite were a ritual. Cassidy sat apart, watching, listening, learning more in silence than words could ever teach. They were unlike any women he had known, strong, proud, bound to each other by a loyalty that pulsed in every glance they shared. And yet he could not deny the way their eyes sometimes lingered on him, as though measuring him for a place he did not yet understand. Hours passed. The storm outside had given way to a pale, watchful sky, but the air inside remained heavy, charged with something invisible. Cassidy felt it pressing closer each time their gazes caught his, each time their voices dropped into whispers he could not comprehend. They moved with a rhythm born of years of training, speaking a language deeper than words, a language of looks and silences that left him outside yet surrounded. When night fell again, the tension reached its edge. Cassidy lay on his narrow bed, eyes open, the ceiling glowing faintly with the fire's reflection. He could hear them speaking near the embers, their voices low, the cadence rising and falling like prayer. He closed his eyes, but the words wound into his chest, pulling at something primal. Sleep slipped away. He lay awake, breathing quietly, his heart echoing with every whispered syllable he could not understand. Then, silence. A pause so sharp he knew they had stopped speaking about him and decided something. He turned slightly, careful not to draw notice, and in the half-light saw them watching him, not with suspicion, with intensity. Their dark eyes glimmered with secrets, with a fire that reached across the room and pinned him where he lay. He swallowed hard, his breath uneven, as though he had been caught in the act of dreaming. The firelight painted their faces gold, revealing strength softened by vulnerability, warriors shaped by love as much as war. Nia's gaze held the steel of discipline, yet softened when it lingered on him. Kira's eyes, deeper, darker, carried curiosity and hunger in equal measure. Together their presence wrapped around him like the storm itself, wild, unstoppable, but strangely healing, as if their very existence called his spirit to rise higher than he had ever dared. When Cassidy finally drifted into uneasy sleep, he dreamed of them, dreams of firelight, of hands reaching across distance, of voices calling his name in a language he could not speak but somehow felt written into his bones. He awoke before dawn to find them standing over him, tall shadows against the dim light of morning, their faces unreadable, but their presence undeniable. "The storm is over," he murmured, though the words felt hollow. "Yes," Nia answered, her voice low, resonant. "But something else has begun." Her sister stepped closer, her breath warm in the cool morning air. "You saved us. You risked everything for us. And now—" She paused, the weight of her words sinking deeper than thunder. "Now you stand at the edge of something you do not yet see." Cassidy sat upright, his heart pounding, caught between fear and wonder. The sisters flanked him without malice, but with certainty, their nearness like fire on his skin. He felt suspended between two worlds, the life he had always known, simple and solitary, and the storm they carried with them, fierce, dangerous, irresistible. And in that fragile, breathless moment, Cassidy understood. He had not only pulled them from the rocks that night, they had pulled him into their lives, into their destiny, and there would be no going back. Night returned with a velvet silence, the kind that hums with secrets too heavy for daylight. The storm had left the world clean and raw, but inside the cabin another kind of storm was gathering. Cassidy sat near the dying fire, the glow painting his weathered hands in gold and shadow. Across the room, the sisters whispered in their own tongue, words flowing swift and intimate like river water, their gazes darting toward him and away again. He could not understand the meaning, but he felt the weight of it in his chest, the way their voices tightened the air until every breath carried the taste of expectation. When the fire dwindled low, they rose together, tall silhouettes moving with the grace of predators, and crossed the narrow space to his door. Cassidy's heart thudded hard as he heard the faint creak of wood. They lingered, speaking softly to each other. Then the footsteps returned, slower this time, deliberate. He lay back on his bed, his body taut, his mind aflame with thoughts he had never dared to shape into words. The door opened without sound. Nia entered first, her dark hair braided back, her strong frame casting a shadow that filled his small room. Kira followed, her eyes shining like coals in the half-light, her presence so commanding it made the walls feel too close. They stopped at the foot of his bed, their gazes heavy, their breathing steady, as though they had rehearsed this moment in silence long before the storm brought them here. Cassidy pushed himself upright, the blanket falling from his chest. His throat was dry, his heart caught between dread and wonder. "What are you saying?" he whispered. The sisters looked at each other, and in that single glance some unspoken agreement passed between them. When Nia spoke, her voice was soft, yet unyielding, carrying a gravity that sent a shiver through him. "We discovered something in our vision quest, something about what we want." Kira stepped closer, her words low and deliberate, the rhythm of her accent turning each syllable into music. "We both want the same thing, the same man." Cassidy froze, the air sucked from his lungs. He searched their faces, certain he had misunderstood, but the certainty in their eyes crushed doubt. His voice cracked, rough as gravel. "That's impossible." "In your world," Nia answered, moving closer until the firelight caught the curve of her jaw. "Perhaps it is. But in ours, when two women choose the same man, they can share him." Kira's words followed, soft as smoke, fierce as flame. "And we have chosen you." The silence that followed was alive, pulsing, too vast to hold. Cassidy felt his chest tighten, his world tilt beneath him. These were not ordinary women. They were daughters of Ayana, warriors whose bloodline was bound by fire and law, and yet here they stood, offering him something he could not have imagined. Love multiplied, love forbidden, love that broke every rule of their people. He swallowed hard, his body trembling with fear and longing. "Your father will kill me," he whispered, the truth tasting like ash. Nia's lips curved into a shadow of a smile. "Only if we do not convince him you are worthy." Kira reached out, her fingertips brushing his arm, sending a jolt of fire through him. "And we believe you are worthy indeed." Their eyes burned into his, and Cassidy knew that his life had changed forever. He had thought himself their savior, but the truth unfurled before him. They were saving him in return, lifting him from the loneliness and emptiness of a life half-lived into something fierce, something whole. The fire popped, scattering sparks into the dim air. The sisters withdrew slowly, their eyes never leaving his as they returned to their blankets near the hearth. Yet their words echoed inside him, searing his chest, burning away every certainty he had ever known. Sleep came to him like a stranger, shallow and restless, filled with visions of two women who had chosen him against the world. By dawn, when hoofbeats thundered across the ridge, Cassidy's fate was already sealed. Nia rose in an instant, moving to the window, her voice taut. 4 riders, Apache. Kira's hand went to her side, reaching instinctively for weapons she did not carry. Her jaw tightened. They are following the storm's path. A search party. Cassidy's pulse quickened, dread coiling in his stomach. If they find you here, they will think you captured us, Nia finished, her dark eyes narrowing. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer, until voices called out in Apache, demanding an answer from the small cabin. Cassidy felt the weight of the sisters' choice pressing against him, the memory of their whispered confession burning hotter than fear. He knew in that moment there was no turning back. The door shuddered under heavy fists. The voices outside grew sharper, angrier, and just as Cassidy's breath caught in his chest, Kira leaned close, her whisper warm against his ear. What happens next depends on whether you want what we want. Before he could answer, the pounding at the door turned to thunder, and the voices demanded entry. The sisters moved with calm precision, arranging themselves around the room, their faces masks of composure. But Cassidy's heart knew the truth. The storm outside had only passed to make way for the one inside. And when the door swung wide, filling the room with the shadows of armed warriors, Cassidy Flynn understood he had stepped into a love that was not merely his salvation, but his trial. A love that would test his courage, his heart, and the very fabric of who he believed himself to be. The door crashed open, and the cabin filled with shadows. 4 warriors, their faces painted, their eyes hard as flint. Weapons gleamed in their hands, dripping rain onto the wooden floor. In the midst of their sudden presence, Cassidy felt the air grow thick with judgment. At once their gazes landed on Nia and Kira, alive, unbroken, standing tall as though the storm had never touched them. Relief flickered across the men's faces for only a heartbeat before suspicion replaced it, sharp and heavy as drawn steel. Cassidy stood frozen, torn between fear and the pounding knowledge of what had passed the night before. The sisters had chosen him, whispered truths into his ear that still burned in his chest like wildfire. Now their people had come, and every heartbeat seemed to edge closer to bloodshed. Takakota, scarred and unyielding, stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of command. War Chief Ayana will hear this with his own ears. All of you, come. His eyes lingered on Cassidy, suspicion simmering like coals. He had seen enough to know something bound the rancher and the sisters in ways unspoken. Nia spoke first, her voice steady, her authority undeniable. Takakota, this rancher sheltered us as the treaty requires. Without him, we would be dead beneath the rocks. Kira's gaze softened as it turned toward Cassidy, then hardened again as she faced the warriors. He gave without asking, protected without taking. He saved us. Takakota's expression did not change, but the flicker of calculation in his eyes betrayed him. He gestured sharply. "You will return now. All of you." Cassidy's stomach turned to ice. His horse was brought forward, his arms bound by expectation rather than rope. Flanked on either side by warriors, he mounted, the sisters riding beside him with silent strength. The canyon stretched before them, vast and shadowed, every hoofbeat pounding like a drum of destiny. The settlement emerged suddenly, hidden in the arms of stone cliffs. Smoke rose from cooking fires, children's laughter stilled as eyes turned toward the party. The air thickened with whispers when the people saw their chief's daughters alive, returned as though from the grave, and beside them a white rancher whose very presence stirred unease. War Chief Ayana emerged, tall and commanding, his silver-threaded hair gleaming in the sun, his eyes, dark and unreadable, fixed first on his daughters. Relief, fierce and fleeting, softened his face before hardening once more when his gaze shifted to Cassidy. The weight of that look rooted Cassidy where he sat, his throat dry, his heart pounding. "You sheltered them," Ayana said at last, his voice precise, controlled. Cassidy dismounted carefully, bowing his head though his instincts screamed to run. "I found them injured. I did what I could. Nothing more." "Nothing more," Ayana repeated, circling him like a wolf. "And yet you stand alive beside them when others would have left them to die. Many men see opportunity where there is weakness, but you did not." The chief's eyes narrowed. "In my culture, a man who saves the life of a chief's family incurs a debt. You will be repaid." Cassidy shook his head, voice low. "I ask for nothing." But the chief's daughters moved then, stepping closer, flanking him as they had before. Every elder, every warrior watching understood the meaning. It was no accident, it was declaration. Nia's chin lifted, her words sharp and unflinching. "Father, our vision quest has shown us truth. It has revealed our destiny." Ayana's eyes narrowed further, the crowd silent as stone. "Speak plainly." Kira stepped forward, her voice ringing like a bell through the canyon. "We both choose him." Gasps rippled through the gathered people. The air itself seemed to crack with disbelief. Cassidy felt the world sway beneath him, his pulse a wild drum in his ears. The sisters stood firm, their bodies tall and proud, their hands brushing against his arms as though sealing him in place. "You both choose the same man?" Ayana's voice cut like a blade. "Yes," Nia said, steady and unwavering. "As our great-grandmother once did with her sister. When survival required strength, when unity demanded sacrifice." Murmurs stirred among the elders, some nodding, others frowning. Cassidy's breath caught. He had never heard of such a union, yet history seemed to whisper through the silence, echoing precedent he had never known. The chief's gaze pinned him, sharp and merciless. "You understand what they offer you. To accept means you abandon your world forever. You will be Apache. You will carry our trials, our burdens, our laws. Refuse, and you ride away free, but you never see them again." Cassidy's chest ached with the weight of choice. He looked at Nia, at Kira, their eyes fierce and vulnerable all at once. They had risked everything to stand beside him, to speak their truth before their people. In their gaze he saw not only desire, but faith, faith in him, in the man they believed he could become. He drew a breath, steadier than he felt. "If I stay, if I accept, will I have not just your permission, Chief, but your blessing?" The canyon held its breath. For the first time, Ayana's lips curved into something like respect, the faintest shadow of a smile. "You ask the right question. A man wise enough to seek blessing, strong enough to risk his life, brave enough to hold the hearts of both my daughters. Perhaps that man deserves what they offer." The people stirred, whispers swelling like wind in the trees. Cassidy stood rooted between the sisters, his heart blazing with fear and longing. He had never imagined a future like this. Yet standing here beneath the weight of the tribe's gaze, he knew with startling clarity. His destiny had already chosen him. And so the chief's voice rang out, commanding and final. "Then you will face the trials, strength, wisdom, and courage. Prove yourself, and we will bind you to my daughters and to our people. Fail, and you leave as you came, alone." The crowd hushed again, the decree echoing across the canyon like thunder. Cassidy's throat burned dry, but when he glanced at Nia and Kira, the fire in their eyes steadied him. He had stepped into the storm willingly. Now he would walk through it. The air shifted, alive with prophecy. The path ahead was treacherous, yet filled with possibility. Cassidy felt the weight of every eye upon him, yet also the warmth of the two women beside him, their presence a shield and a promise. He drew a breath that filled his chest with new strength, and the story pressed onward, carrying him toward trials that would test not only his body, but his very heart. The announcement of the trials spread through the camp like fire through dry grass. Whispers carried from tent to tent, children hushed as they watched, women paused in their weaving, and warriors eyed Cassidy with a mix of suspicion and grudging curiosity. He stood in the open, the canyon walls towering around him, the weight of expectation pressing harder than the storm that had brought him here. The sisters flanked him once more, their bodies tall and steady, their eyes fierce with faith. He felt it in every heartbeat, that he was not alone, that their strength had already begun to pour into him like water into parched earth. At first light, the trial of strength began. Takakota led Cassidy beyond the settlement, into the hunting grounds where silence lived heavy among the pines. A bow and quiver were thrust into his hands, tools unfamiliar, heavier than the rifle he was used to. He swallowed, feeling clumsy, untrained. Yet when he met Naya's gaze, standing near the edge of the clearing, her lips pressed tight with determination, he felt a steadiness settle into him. Kira, too, gave him a single nod, her eyes deep and unwavering, and in that silent exchange he understood. He was not merely carrying his own hopes, but theirs as well. The buck's trail wound through the forest, faint impressions in the mud, branches snapped under heavy antlers. Cassidy followed, each step cautious, remembering the patience the land itself had taught him in long years of ranching. He moved slowly, letting the forest breathe around him, until at last the animal came into sight, a proud creature, tall and alert, its breath steaming in the morning air. His hands trembled on the bowstring, the weapon foreign in his grip. But then a memory. The sisters' hands guiding him, their voices steady as they taught him to feel the string, not fight it. Nia's touch correcting his stance, Kira's fingers brushing his arm as she adjusted his aim. He breathed deeply, letting those moments fill him, grounding him in their faith. When the arrow flew, it cut the air like a whispered prayer, striking true. The buck fell swiftly, without suffering. The watching warriors murmured, grudging respect in their voices. Cassidy's chest heaved, not only with effort, but with relief, with something deeper, pride not for himself, but for the bond that had carried him to this moment. He returned with the kill across his shoulders, the weight heavy but noble, like the burden of love he had begun to accept. That night, the trial of wisdom awaited. In the chief's council circle, firelight bathed the faces of elders and warriors alike. A dispute was laid before him, two families quarreling over water rights, the spring that ran between their lands dwindling after the storm. Voices rose, sharp with anger, hands gesturing as though every word carried a blade. Cassidy sat silently at first, listening, feeling the weight of eyes on him. He remembered long nights settling ranch disputes, moments when neighbors threatened violence over fences and cattle. He thought of the land, of fairness, of what would bring healing rather than division. Slowly he spoke, his voice calm, steady, carrying the rhythm of plain truth. He suggested a sharing of the spring, one family to water their herds at dawn, the other at dusk, each respecting the needs of the other. At first, silence followed. Then murmurs spread. The solution was simple, but it bore the mark of fairness. The elders exchanged approving glances, and Ayana himself nodded once, sharp and certain. Cassidy's heart steadied again. Wisdom was not in cleverness, but in care, in seeing both sides and offering peace. The final trial came with dawn's first fire. Ayana led Cassidy to a canyon wall where the earth itself seemed to rise like a fortress. High above, a narrow ledge clung to the rock, and below it a sacred cave, its entrance shadowed, mysterious. "Retrieve the feather of the white eagle," the chief commanded, his voice carrying like thunder. "Return it to me, and your courage will be proven." The climb tore at Cassidy's muscles, every foothold threatening to give way, every stretch of his hands a prayer. Below, the tribe gathered, watching, their breaths held as if their own lives balanced on his grip. But when his arms trembled, when fear threatened to unman him, he thought of Nia's fierce eyes, of Kira's steady hand. He thought of their whispered confession, of the love they had risked everything to speak aloud. The strength that filled him then was not his own. It was theirs, flowing into him like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. When at last he reached the cave, the air inside was cool, heavy with the scent of ancient stone. And there, lying on the ground as though placed by destiny itself, was the white eagle feather. He lifted it carefully, reverently, his chest swelling with awe. The climb back was harder, every muscle burning, but the sound of voices rising below him gave him wings. He returned to the canyon floor with the feather in his grasp, his body trembling, his heart blazing. Ayana took the feather in silence, studying it in the glow of morning. Then, at last, the chief's voice rang clear, steady, certain. "You have proven yourself worthy. Tonight, we bind you to my daughters and to my people." The tribe erupted in murmurs, some voices awed, others doubtful, but none could deny what they had seen. Cassidy turned, and there were Naya and Kira, their eyes shining, their faces unmasked at last. Pride, relief, longing, all of it alive in their gazes, flooding him with warmth, so healing it brought tears to his eyes. As the sun dipped beyond the canyon walls and firelight rose to paint the night, Cassidy stood between the sisters, Ayana before them. The people gathered as witnesses. Words of ancient tradition filled the air, spoken in Apache, carrying the weight of history. Then Ayana's voice shifted to English, solemn and clear. What was 3 separate lives is now one shared destiny. What was division becomes unity through love. The words fell into Cassidy's heart like rain into dry earth, soaking deep, bringing life where loneliness once dwelled. He felt the sister's hands slip into his, strong and warm, and for the first time in years, he felt wholly alive. The poor rancher who had wandered into a storm had been remade by it, healed by it, transformed into something he had never imagined, a man chosen not by chance, but by love, by destiny, by 2 women who saw in him what he could not see in himself. And as the fire rose higher, as songs lifted into the canyon sky, Cassidy knew the trials had not ended. They had only just begun, not of body or mind, but of heart. Yet he welcomed them, for he would walk them with Nia and Kira at his side, their love a storm that healed as fiercely as it burned. The fire of the bonding ceremony still glowed in Cassidy's chest long after the tribe's songs faded into the night. The flames had been witness. The canyon walls had echoed with voices that carried him from the life he once knew into the life he had chosen. Between Naya and Kira he had stood, not as an outsider, but as a man embraced, tested, and finally accepted. Yet as the people drifted to their lodges and the night settled with quiet reverence, Cassidy felt the weight of transformation heavier than ever. He had crossed a threshold with no return. The life of a solitary rancher was gone, replaced by something wilder, larger, and infinitely more dangerous. The life of a man bound to 2 women who loved without limit. The sisters guided him away from the circle, their steps sure, their presence a shield against the eyes that still watched with doubt or wonder. They led him to a small dwelling set apart from the others, its entrance adorned with subtle carvings of feathers and storm patterns. Inside, the air was warmer, softer, scented with sage and wood smoke. The space was theirs, where they had grown, where they had dreamed, where they had whispered of futures that once seemed impossible. Tonight, they brought him into that world as though it had always waited for him. Cassidy stood uncertain for a heartbeat, his rough hands hanging uselessly at his sides. But Nia moved first, her eyes fierce yet tender, her fingers reaching for his with a certainty that made his pulse quicken. "Now you are ours," she whispered, her voice carrying not possession, but promise, a vow that felt healing in its depth. Kira came close from the other side, her hand brushing his arm, her gaze holding him steady. "And we are yours." The words settled into him like rain soaking into dry ground. The years of loneliness, of tending cattle beneath endless skies, of nights where silence pressed too hard against his chest, all of it seemed to fall away beneath their touch. They had chosen him, not in desperation, but in strength, in clear defiance of fear and tradition. And in that choice, he felt himself remade. The 3 of them moved together, guided not by haste, but by a rhythm older than time. The sisters spoke softly in their tongue, their voices weaving around him like a song, a language he could not translate but felt deep in his bones. They touched him with reverence, not as a stranger, but as a man who had been tested and found worthy. And in their touch he discovered something he had never known. Love that did not divide but multiplied, a love that healed wounds he had carried in silence. When dawn broke, Cassidy woke between them, their bodies warm against his, their breaths steady, their presence surrounding him like armor. The sunlight streamed into the dwelling, illuminating their braided hair, their strong hands resting over his chest as though anchoring him to this new life. For the first time in years, he felt at peace, not because the path ahead was easy, but because he no longer walked it alone. The days that followed were filled with adjustment. Cassidy learned the rhythm of the tribe, the cadence of their mornings, the responsibilities of his new place among them. Some warriors still watched him with suspicion, their eyes sharp, their whispers sharper. But each time doubt threatened, Naya's hand found his, steady and strong, or Kira's voice soothed his spirit with a gentleness that surprised even her. They carried him through with their presence, their belief in him unshakable, their love a fire that warmed not only his nights, but his very soul. He trained with them, learned the bow more deeply, felt the rhythm of their movements in his own body. The sisters moved like dancers, like storm winds in human form, and slowly he began to match their steps. In quiet hours they taught him their language, laughing softly when his tongue stumbled, rewarding him with touches and smiles when he spoke a word with clarity. The healing power of their laughter filled him, erasing the loneliness that had once seemed endless. At night they returned always to each other, to him, to the bond they had declared before their people. Lying between them, Cassidy often thought of the trials, how each test of strength, wisdom and courage had shaped him, but how none of it compared to the trials of the heart that still lay ahead. Loving two women, belonging to a people not his own, building a future from the fragile bridge between two worlds. These were the challenges that would test him more deeply than any climb or hunt. Yet he felt no fear in that knowledge. With Nia's steady fire and Kira's fierce tenderness beside him, he believed he could face anything. The tribe, too, began to shift. Where once there had been only suspicion, curiosity bloomed. Children followed him as he worked. Elders asked him questions about the world beyond the canyon, and some warriors nodded with respect when they saw the sincerity in his labor. The change was slow, uneven, but it was real. Love had not only bound three souls together, it had begun to heal the rift between peoples, to soften walls that had stood for generations. One evening, beneath a sky blazing with stars, Cassidy stood at the edge of the canyon with Nia and Kira beside him. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and earth. He looked at them, their profiles strong against the starlight, and felt a swell of gratitude so fierce it brought tears to his eyes. "I never thought I would have this," he murmured. "I never thought I would be worthy of it." Nia's hand found his, squeezing with quiet strength. "Love makes its own rules," she said softly. Kira leaned close, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered, "And ours has only just begun." The stars wheeled above them, eternal and vast, but Cassidy no longer felt small beneath their gaze. He felt whole, healed, alive in ways he had never imagined. What had begun with a storm had become a destiny, and he knew with a certainty deeper than words that every trial, every risk, had led him exactly here, into a love fierce enough to break barriers, gentle enough to heal, and strong enough to last a lifetime. Years passed, and the canyon carried their story like wind through the pines, whispered in fireside songs, and remembered in the laughter of children who bore the features of both their parents' worlds. Cassidy, once a lonely rancher bound to nothing but his cattle and the wide silence of the plains, had become something else entirely. He rose each day not to the weight of solitude, but to the warmth of two women who had remade his life. Beside Nia's steady fire and Kira's fierce tenderness, he learned what it meant to live fully, to be healed by love that asked nothing but courage in return. The tribe accepted him slowly, then fully, until the sight of the white rancher among them no longer stirred suspicion, but pride. He worked their fields, hunted their game, listened to the wisdom of their elders, and spoke their language with growing fluency. What began as whispers of doubt became nods of respect. The children of the settlement tugged at his hands, eager for stories of storms and bravery, their eyes wide as he spoke of kindness as the truest strength. And when those same children looked at him flanked by Nia and Kira, they saw not division, but unity, a living reminder that love could build bridges where once only fear had stood. In the quiet hours, when the sun dipped low and painted the canyon walls in fire, Cassidy often sat at the threshold of their dwelling, watching his wives move with the grace of warriors, their laughter filling the air with warmth. They had become his compass, his anchor, his storm and his shelter. He no longer remembered the ache of nights spent alone, the hollow silence of an empty cabin. In its place lived a harmony fierce and healing, the kind of love that stitched wounds not only of the heart but of entire peoples. When their children were born, the tribe gathered to bless them with names rooted in strength and hope. In their dark eyes, in the curve of their smiles, the legacy of two worlds burned bright. And in those children, Cassidy saw the proof of everything they had fought to protect, that love had no boundaries, that destiny was not chained to fear, that healing could come in the form of hearts choosing boldly. Years later, as grey touched his hair, Cassidy often told the story of the night that changed everything. He would sit with his children, his grandchildren, by the fire and speak of the storm, of two figures trapped beneath stone, of the choice he made to carry them through mud and rain. Nia and Kira would smile, their eyes soft with memory, and add their part, the vision quest, the whispers in the firelight, the courage it took to break the rules of tradition for the truth of their hearts. And always, at the end of the tale, Cassidy would speak of the lesson that bound it all together. Sometimes the storms we fear most, he would say, his voice steady, are the ones that bring us home. Sometimes love comes not to fit the rules of the world, but to write new ones. And when you choose it, fully, without fear, it will heal you. It will change you. It will make you whole. On those nights, the firelight danced on the faces of those he loved most, and Cassidy knew with certainty that his destiny had never been about fences or cattle or survival. It had been about this, about family, about unity, about a love so fierce it could not be measured by one heart alone. The storm had given him everything. So now, dear one, as you sit with this story, let it breathe into your own heart. Let it remind you that love has no limits, that even the fiercest storms can carry healing, That destiny sometimes waits in the moments we least expect. If this tale touched you, if it brought warmth to your spirit or healing to some quiet corner of your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Like this story so it may reach others who need its light, and subscribe to join us for more journeys where love, courage, and destiny entwine. Your presence here means more than words can say, and together we can keep these fires of hope burning bright.